Hello Commander community, I'm Paul the Commander Theorist, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering video. Today's Commander theory will be slightly different than others, as rather than exploring my analysis of just one Commander deck, we will be instead exploring an entire archetype of deck, token decks. This is one of the first deck types I'd ever brewed when I began playing Commander all those years ago, and it is by far one of my favorites to play to this day. Token decks differ from traditional Commander decks in that rather than focusing on the creatures you already include in the deck, it aims to create creature tokens outside of that who will do the heavy lifting for the deck. And these generally come in two forms. You have token decks that create a few large creatures, such as 4/4 creatures or 5/5 creatures who will overwhelm opponents with their sheer size. I generally attribute decks with Trostani or Omnath Locus of Rage to these kinds of builds. Then we have decks that aim to go wider, generally with smaller creatures such as 1/1 creatures, but in larger quantities. I'll usually associate these with elf decks like Reese, Zuri, and token decks like Rift the Awakener, Apatra, Krenko. Many of these decks have options to buff up these token armies, so I often find that the size of the creatures is less important as the amount that you can churn out. A token deck's biggest strength lies in its ability to swarm the field with relative ease. Decks like Rith and Krenko have very little problem in getting feet on the ground to begin swinging, and often these token decks run green mana in order to ramp up quickly to get to the mana requirements that the cards demand to pump up the team. Win conditions for these kinds of deck include cards such as Overrun, Overwhelming Stampede, and Craterhoof Behemoth. The Craterhoof Behemoth is perhaps the best win condition for token decks, as rather than just giving a set power buff, it gives a boost based on the size of your creature army, which can easily give more than enough firepower to wipe out the opponents. Just having 10 creatures in play will give +10/+10 to all of your creatures, which is ridiculous to face down, and trample. The biggest weakness of token decks is something that needs to be kept in mind while brewing your deck. Token decks are most susceptible to board wipes. Wrath effects can often cripple your game, leaving you with nothing to defend yourself with and forcing you into a position where you have to rebuild. And while there are a few decks like Apatra who can generally be resilient to a board wipe to some extent, the vast majority will fold to a single Wrath. The other thing to keep in mind while building a token deck is to find a balance between token producers, general value cards, and support cards. If you find yourself with a handful of cards that will only give power boosts to your creatures, and you have 0 cards to give yourself creatures, that's a problem. You need to find some ways to create creatures, whether it be cards like Imperious Perfect, who exists as a creature who can spawn other creatures, or something like Awakening Zone that can guarantee you can generate creatures regardless of your board state. While the numbers of each kind of card can vary based on what works for you, I generally find that it's more useful to keep more ways to generate creatures than the cards to buff up my board. There are a number of ways to bolster your board state, and we're going to explore this next. You can use cards like Kathar's Crusade, Sigil Captain, and the Beastmaster Ascension to give basic power and toughness boosts to your entire team. You can also utilize cards to give your board state keyword abilities such as Eldrazi Monument, Akroma's Memorial, and others to make sure your creatures will dominate in combat. Another option is to simply outnumber your opponents. The vast majority of creatures in Magic can only block one creature at a time. Some rare exceptions do exist, but if you have far more creatures than the defending player, they will be taking substantial amounts of damage when they're unable to block all incoming attacks. Cards like Overrun that grant trample are especially useful here, as even the blocked creatures might be able to get some damage through. Cards like Parallel Lives and Anointed Perception both work wonders to give you tons more tokens, and these are often some of the first cards you should consider putting into that token deck, as long as they're in your colors, of course. Now, one other strategy with tokens that is one that I find most characterized by Krenko Mob Boss. Krenko offers us a powerful strategy and is one of the few rare mono-red color scheme decks that work well. Goblin tokens are generally 1/1 creatures, so they don't have a whole lot of combat prowess. But the amount that a moderately built Krenko deck can churn out on its own can serve as effectively for 2 other strategies. Cards like Impact Tremors and its more powerful twin Perforos, God of the Forge, offer the ability to singe opponents each time a creature enters your battlefield. You produce enough tokens and your opponents will be burnt to death. In addition, Goblin decks are notorious for flinging their excess tokens at opponents. The aptly named Goblin Bombardment is a great example of how the tokens that Krenko's deck can produce can also be used as ammunition for a less combat-centric style. Now, let's go into a pair of deck theories, starting with one of my favorite token commanders, Trostani Selesnya's Voice. We will be taking a close look at what Trostani does and what she should expect from her tile of token deck. Trostani is a 2/5 Dryad that costs 2 mana each of white and green. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. So right off the bat, you will gain life off of every creature you have entered the battlefield. This includes creatures you cast from your hand as well as the creature tokens that are created. You can also pay 3 mana and tap her in order to populate. Populate is a mechanic from the Return to Ravnica Selesnya guild that allows you to create a creature token that's a copy of an already existing token you control. Often I recommend this ability to target whatever your largest or most powerful creature token is. So the build we will be theorizing today focuses heavily on getting tokens into play, all the while gaining us life. This will be bolstering our defense to the point where we have more than enough creatures to block opponents' attacks and ensure that we have far more life than opponents will have the ability to take down. This very much is a go-wide strategy with tokens, so let's get to the rest of the deck, shall we? So most importantly of this theory, I want to touch upon the cards that we will use to create tokens. Starting off, we have the Avenger of Zendikar, who will create a number of 0/1 plant tokens equal to the amount of lands we control. This is a powerful late game ability as we will be able to produce a ton of tokens that the Avenger of Zendikar has the ability to buff, with a landfall trigger putting a +1/+1 counter on each plant we control. Bramble Sovereign is a pretty interesting inclusion for this deck, as whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, for just 2 extra mana, we can create a token that's a copy of that creature. This is tremendous, and we want to look at some ideal situations that we can get the most value out of this effect. A second Avenger of Zendikar, a second Hornet Queen, a second Craterhoof Behemoth. All of them are excellent options, and at such a small price, it's a perfect inclusion for our deck. Crested Sunmare brings a nice amount of synergy to the deck, giving your horse creatures indestructible. This will become relevant once you begin creating 5/5 horse tokens during each player's end step, as you have the Soul Sister package as well as Trostani to give you life gain with every creature you play. Hornet Queen can serve as a creator of an excellent defense, giving us a total of 5 Death Touch flyers that will spell trouble for opponents who might want to attack us. Copy this with Bramble Sovereign, populate with Trostani, and our army of buzzing bees will blossom into a bloody mess for opponents. Buzz buzz, here comes death. Mycoloth is a card I love to get value out of, as you can sacrifice any number of creatures to it as it enters the battlefield. It'll then get 2/+1/+1 counters on it for each creature it's devoured. Then at the beginning of your upkeep, you create a 1/1 Saproling token for each counter on it. This will get out of hand very quickly, as you can use the massive amounts of tokens you generate to feed the Mycoloth to immense sizes, and then on your upkeep, you amass a larger army of Saprolings. Rampaging Baloths is next, and is one of the bulkier token generators, creating a single 4/4 with every land we drop. This is excellent in conjunction with Trostani, as between this creature hitting play and the 4/4 it'll create later, we can gain at least 10 life in one turn. Resplendent Angel is a relative newcomer from M19. If you've gained 5 or more life during that turn, which can include your opponents, you can create a 4/4 Flying and Vigilant Angel token. You can also sink 6 mana into it to buff it 2/2 and give it lifelink. Arachnogenesis begins our non-creature token generators and is an excellent fog ability for this deck, giving you a 1/2 spider for every creature attacking you. Remember, Trostani gives us life based on the toughness of the creatures entering the battlefield, so we will gain 2 life for each spider created here. Nomad Assembly is huge, giving us a 1/2 core soldier for each creature we control, and then we get a free copy of it at our next upkeep. So we essentially triple our forces in a span of 2 turns, which can put us clear out of reach for most decks. Storm Herd is another WinCon style card, giving us a 1/1 flying Pegasus army equal to our life total. Considering Trostani gains us life as we build up our army, should this hit play, we are likely to see quite the herd. Now, a personal inclusion to wrap up our token generation is the Phyrexian Processor. This artifact costs 4 mana to play, and as it enters the battlefield, you can pay any amount of life. You can then tap it and pay 4 to create a minion creature token, whose power and toughness is equal to the amount of life you paid to play the Processor. So again, if we pay an immense amount of life for this card, say 30, 40, even more if we can afford it, then you generate the token. If Trostani should be chilling on the battlefield, you'll just gain back all that life you just paid. Then use Trostani to populate. Oh look, you got 2 50/50 minions now. That's cool. Now that we have our token generation in place, it's time to buff them up. We run a few cards that will make our tokens grow to titanic proportions. Archangel of Thune is a personal favorite of mine, as with every instance of life gain, you get a +1/+1 counter across your entire board. Elish Norn, the vicious white praetor, buffs your team by 2, while weakening your opponents by 2, potentially wiping their boards clear, or at the very least, making their board puny to block yours. Heliod gives your board Vigilance, Nylea gives Trample. Both of these are excellent keyword abilities to give your entire board state. Shalai, the Voice of Plenty, gives Hexproof, rendering your creatures untouchable by your opponent's effects. Sigarda, Host of Herons, protects you from Edict effects. No sacrificing permanents unless we're the ones doing it. Heroic Intervention is crucial to avoid board wipes, giving our board hexproof and indestructible, and if all else fails, Teferi's Protection gives us an extra turn to survive. Please note the new rulings for tokens regarding phasing, as prior to 2017's Commander product, a phased out token ceased to exist, very much like it would if it were blinked. But this has since been changed to allow tokens to phase back in. Overwhelming Stampede buffs our board with Trample and a boost equal to whatever the largest power is on the board. Beastmaster Ascension will go off very easily, as after the 7th attack, all of our creatures get +5/+5. Kathar's Crusade is excellent as we spawn more tokens, giving counters away to creatures left and right. Please note that in cases such as Storm Herd, with multiple creatures enter the battlefield simultaneously, they will all see each other as the Crusade triggers for each of them, resulting in an immense amount of +1/+1 counters. Mirari's Wake gives an Anthem effect and lets our lands tap for additional mana. True Conviction gives us double strike and lifelink, not only making our creatures incredibly tough in combat, but giving us incredible life gaining power as well. Eldrazi Monument is great protection and combat power, and the single sacrifice we need each turn is easily handled with the amount of fodder this deck produces. Now for 2 win conditions that revolve around the dumb amounts of life gain in this deck is capable of. 1. The obvious Feldar Sovereign. Have 40 more life with this in play at the beginning of your upkeep, and you win. There's also the Death Star, known to most people as Aetherflux Reservoir, which requires substantially more life to kill each opponent, but it becomes a huge threat very quickly if you're within the range of killing an opponent. So our game plan with this deck is to get Trostani out, spitting out tokens of varying sizes and shapes. We will gain life off of the so many creatures entering the battlefield that'll pad our life to untouchable levels and amass an army to defend it. One of the only ways to really stop this deck once we get into that triple-digit life totals is through commander damage, and that is easier said than done. The deck is very capable of some passive playstyles, simply building up creatures and gaining life, and then taking one big swoop to take out everyone out at the table, or we can be more aggressive with our tokens, trying to swing in whenever we can to get in some damage, whichever way works best for you. Now, I also want to go into another commander who focuses on tokens as well. Only this deck is slightly more focused on a specific type of token. From the Commander 2018 Precon decks, we received a new commander that I absolutely love. Behold, Varina the Lich Queen. Varina is an Esper zombie wizard who costs 1 each of blue, white, and black, as well as 1 additional mana of any color. She is a 4/4. Whenever you attack with any number of zombies, you draw that many cards, then you discard that many cards, and then gain that much life. So if you attack with 5 zombies, you'll draw 5 cards, discard 5 cards, and then gain 5 life. The number of cards discarded is always equal to the number of zombies attacking, so even if for some reason you draw more or less than the number attacking, you do still have the requirement to discard that same number. This can be good if you choose to run something like Allhammered's Archive, which can give you double the card draw and double the life gain, but the discard amount still remains the same. Varina also comes equipped with a second activated ability. For 2 mana and 2 cards you exile from your graveyard, you can create a 2/2 tapped zombie. So a number of things we want to look at when analyzing Varina. She herself is a zombie, so she can trigger her own ability if nothing else. She also offers us card draw and life gain, but in terms of card draw, I look at her abilities being very synergistic to a specific build of deck. Zombie decks, as the name implies, are heavily reliant on using the graveyard as an asset. Just because you have zombies in your graveyard does not by any means put them out of your reach. On the contrary, we have a number of methods to either return those cards to the field one way or another or to your hand. The biggest strengths I find in this build is the sheer volume of zombie tokens you'll be producing. Zombies are one of the larger token tribes, often being created as 2/2 creatures and posing a threat in just their sheer numbers alone. Cards like Endless Ranks of the Dead also ensure that we can produce tons of hordes to defend us. But there is a glaring weakness that zombie decks like this often have. Zombie decks, more often than not, have to enter the battlefield tapped. This renders them completely unusable until your next turn, at which point some of them may have been removed, may have been attacked already, whatever the case. We do have a few instances of zombie tokens coming into play untapped, but the vast majority of them will enter the battlefield tapped. The other weakness of the deck is that, unlike many of my decks, which focus on keeping the mana curve relatively low to ensure cards can be played at almost any point of the game, this deck does contain quite a bit of a higher curve than normal. So to rectify this, when building, you want to make sure that you have the right amount of mana production and mana ramp in the form of the mana rocks to really get your engine going as soon as you can. So, to begin our delve into the depths of Varina's crypts, we will want to look at the cards that create zombie tokens. This is going to be the core of what our deck wants to do. The vast majority of these cards focus on utilizing our various resources at hand to create a 2/2 or so black zombie creature token. Starting off, Crypt Breaker is an excellent creature to include in this deck. For 1 black mana, we get a 2 useful ability creature. We can pay 2, tap it, and discard a card to create a zombie token. We can also tap 3 zombies that are untapped in order to draw a card and lose 1 life. This is excellent card advantage and useful in a pinch to grind through our library. The life loss is negligible given Varina's life gaining power. Liliana, Death's Majesty, is a flavor win here, giving us a zombie with our +1 ability, and we mill 2 of our own library. We can also -3 to revive a target creature from our graveyard as a zombie, and then we can -7 to board wipe anything that's not a zombie. All around, she works great for the deck. Zombie Infestation lets us pitch 2 cards to create a zombie. Simple and effective. Lich Lord of Unks gives us 2 powerful effects. We can pay 2 and tap it to create a 1/1 zombie wizard, which is the only instance where the zombies we create are not 2/2 creatures. We can also sink 4 mana into its second ability, where target player mills and loses life equal to the number of zombies they control. Dread Summons can be brutal the more mana we dump into the X cost, milling each player, and for each creature sent to the graveyard through it, we get a 2/2 zombie. These come in tapped, and the first instance of this we've covered so far. It's a powerful effect, as the deck also comes with a pretty small mill sub-theme. Grave Titan is a behemoth in this deck, quite literally, and it creates 2 zombie tokens whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, making it a great engine to churn out tokens. Diregraph Colossus is a bit of a slower engine for tokens, creating one only when we cast the zombie. This still can net us quite the squad of zombie tokens in the end. Undead Alchemist is a peculiar example of the mill strategy. This creature changes how your zombies will react with the opponents that they attack. Rather than causing damage, instead your zombies will cause your opponents that they connect to mill cards equal to the amount of damage they would have caused. In addition, whenever a creature is put from an opponent's library to their graveyard, you get a zombie. So with this, combining with the sheer volume of zombies that will likely get their claws on opponents, you can expect quite a bit of mill to go on. Josu Ves, the Lich Knight, brother to Liliana Ves, is a very powerful zombie knight, who, if kicked, will spit out 8 additional zombie knight tokens who also have menace. This can be quite the hefty blow to an opponent who's not ready to face the hordes. Ghoul Caller Gisa, another powerful commander for a zombie deck, lets us pay 1 and tap her to trade in a creature for a number of zombies equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Do you have a nice 6/6 Grave Titan you don't need anymore? Trade it in for 6 more zombies. And since this is not relegated to non-token creatures, you can trade in zombie tokens for more zombies, since the majority of these are 2/2s. And of course, the classic zombie token spawner, Army of the Damned, produces a combined total of 26 zombies. That's intimidating. Let's get greedy and make more tokens then. The Army of Undead must grow. Anointed Procession is our token doubler. Having access to white gave us this monster of an enchantment. Endless Ranks of the Dead offers us potent value here, giving us an extra squad of zombies based on how large our horde is already. Now you may have noticed quite a bit of these cards result in us having more cards in the graveyard, right? Well, we do plan to use these discarded cards as fodder for more interactions. Grave Marshal lets us exile creatures from our graves to make a zombie. Relentless Dead lets itself return to our hand, and we can use it to return another zombie to the battlefield upon it dying. Both are very excellent utilities for the deck. Apprentice Necromancer brings a creature back from our graveyard for a turn and gives it haste. This is excellent to bring back something large that might have been discarded. Undertaker lets us trade a card in hand for a creature in the graveyard. Again, useful to bring back crucial cards. Havengul Lich is a great card that I think needs to see more play. For just 1 mana, you have the ability to cast a creature card from a graveyard this turn. And if you do, the Lich will gain the abilities of that card until the end of turn. So in a weird way, it becomes a vague clone of that creature, and you aren't restricted to your graveyard. So again, everyone's dead creatures are up for grabs. My favorite reanimator spell, the Grimoire of the Dead, lets you pitch cards to put study counters on it. And once you get to 3, you can then return every creature from every graveyard to your battlefield as a zombie. This card is a huge threat no matter what point of the game it hits the battlefield. It holds so much potential, but you do have to put some effort into protecting it until it can go off. Lastly, the classic Zombie Apocalypse will kill all humans, but it revives all your zombies, so even if you don't get to kill any human creatures, you could still benefit from this. Another huge aspect of this deck are the sheer number of Lord creatures this deck runs. These creatures each will give a boon of +1/+1 to your other zombies, and they give some other utility as well. The Death Baron gives your zombies Death Touch and benefits skeleton creatures if you're running any. Undead War Chief gives actually +2/+1 rather than just +1/+1, and it cheapens your zombie spells by 1 generic mana. Lord of the Undead lets you return a zombie from your grave to your hand. Lord of the Undead also lets you give your whole zombie army menace, making them incredibly difficult to block effectively. Risen Executioner has some weird stipulations. It can't block, and while you can recast it from the graveyard, you do have to pay 1 additional mana for each creature in your graveyard. Diregraph Captain saps a life from an opponent whenever another zombie you control dies, making it great when you're about to lose some zombies. Cemetery Reaper lets you exile a creature in a graveyard to make a zombie. Again, not limited to just your graveyard. Wrath Harvest gives menace to your zombies, and again lets you trade a creature in the graveyard for a 2/2 zombie. Necromancer's Covenant is a card that, thanks to Varina, is now playable in a zombie deck. It exiles all creatures from a graveyard and gives you zombies for each creatures. Your zombies also get lifelink while this is in play, which is absurd value, and combined with Varina's power can give you untouchable amounts of life. Plague Belcher burns opponents whenever a zombie you control dies. Binding Mummy taps down artifacts and creatures, which, given the numbers you make, you can tap down everything and then some. Gem Palm Polluter burns an opponent for each zombie in play when you cycle it, and I don't think I'd ever cast this over cycling it. Shepherd of Rot used to be a very dangerous card, as it hurts you as well, but with the life gain aspect of this deck being a huge factor now, you can be put easily out of harm's way, unless of course your army is immense enough to take you out as well. Just be careful. Wayward Servant is my favorite card, taxing 1 life from each opponent, and giving it to you whenever another zombie enters your battlefield. Lastly, while not initially a zombie, Aven Windguide is a very fun mechanic card to put in. Embalming it will create a zombie token version of it, and it gives creature tokens flying and vigilance, which on an army of zombies is ridiculous. Creatures zombies are hard enough to block as is, let alone flying zombies. Now, to touch upon one last section of Varina, I want to look at some cards that have a general utility to a zombie token deck. Graveborn Muse gives you a ton of card draw, albeit at a pretty hefty loss of life. Scarab God lets you scry and burn opponents given the size of your army, and you can eternalize any creature in any graveyard, giving you a 4/4 zombified version of whatever you want. Corpse Harvester lets you grab a land that's a swamp, which can be a non-basic swamp, and a zombie card. I don't think we've a better tutor for this deck that can give you the value each turn that this thing does. Anointer Priest, again, brings the Embalm mechanic, giving you a 1/3 zombie that gives you a life for each creature token that enters the battlefield under your control. Throne of the God Pharaoh makes use of all those pesky entering tapped zombies, burning every opponent with the more things you have tapped. And, last but not least, Rooftop Storm is an immensely powerful card in a deck like this, making every single zombie, Varina included, cost 0 to cast. Of course, with Varina, you still have to pay the commander tax for her, but once you get Rooftop Storm out, you are very likely going to be winning pretty quickly, so not much to worry about. And with that, we will draw this episode of the Commander Theorems to a close. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this video. What do you think of Commander token decks? Do you think they're a deck archetype that you enjoy? What's your favorite token commander to play? Let's talk tokens in the comments below. Remember to like and share this video if you enjoyed it, as it will tremendously help the channel out and let others know this video is worth the watch. If you are new to the channel, I welcome you and hope you'll hit that subscribe button with the notifications turned on so you'll never miss another video. If you're interested in owning a sweet Planeswalker Project playmat, we now have merch available through inkedgaming.com, which I think are the best custom playmats on the market. We will be making new playmat designs soon, so keep an eye out for new designs. If you'd like to help support the Theorems directly, we have a Patreon aimed at improving the channel's quality and hopefully setting up some live gameplay videos in the near future. And as always, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you guys, gals, and NB pals in the next video. Range.
Summer in the hills, those hazy days I do remember. We were running still, had the whole world at our feet, watching seasons change. Our roads were